Hey guys, yet another short video coming at you this week. This week I wanted to be this is gonna be a little more serious, a little darker, if you will. I'll try and make it fun and interactive and all of that. But this week we're gonna talk about coping with heavy calls. What I mean by that is something that's possibly traumatic or something that is uh, just super dark and things that you can dwell on a little too long, and why dispatching why it is stressful and it can be heavy like that. So, it, just like with any other first responder type career, you will at some point in your dispatching career, and this is for you that are thinking about dispatchers as well, just to kind of get a reality check on this. You will at some point deal with a traumatic call, possibly a call involving a death, um, different calls that involve traumatic things while you're on the line with them. One thing that makes this, I think, to me personally, it makes it particularly worse for dispatchers. Uh, well, a few reasons would be one, I know a lot of first responders, I'm trying not to call anyone out here, but a lot of first responders that don't necessarily have disdain for dispatchers, but they don't always understand that calls can be traumatic and heavy for dispatchers as well. Mainly because they view it as dispatchers. To put it bluntly, they think dispatchers are just behind a desk and talking on a phone. They have the easiest job in the world. As someone that's done volunteer firefighting, as someone that's done, I've worked on an ambulance and responded to calls as an EMT paramedic on an ambulance. I can tell you without a doubt, in my mind, in my personal experience, dispatching is the hardest job I've had. Simply because for me, I guess for me it'd be a different perspective as well, because some of these calls I know what I could do or what I should do. um, I know the first thing I would do if I were on scene handling that call, but I can't. I'm stuck behind the phone. I have to listen to a situation occurring with no way to stop it, alleviate it, provide some relief to that situation. There's nothing I can do over the phone to help that, truthfully and honestly. I can try and keep the caller calm. I can try and give as much instruction as I'm legally allowed to, but I cannot physically help that situation at all. So, to me, that's why calls sometimes seem a little heavier. With other dispatchers, it's also there's that aspect to it. Then you have the other I'll say field first responders that don't understand that there's still traumas to taking that call on 911, because you can get calls and sometimes it's like, the job you have to do, you go through it and everything. Some calls are a little more difficult. eh, And again, this is a dark episode, right? Particularly when calls involve children, if they involve family members that have been involved in some type of traumatic injury, um, if they involve self harm or self exit, sometimes they can be super heavy. For instance, I myself, I can count right offhand 2 to 3 calls that the I'm sorry if you hear my cat in the background. Um, I can count 2 to 3 calls personally where the person has been on the line. The only reason they were calling 911 is they wanted to hear a voice while they self exited. Um, Usually, or every time I've dealt with it, by means of gunshot. And it's a very eerie and weird feeling. You're talking to someone, you're trying to relate to them, you're trying to keep them talking and around for as long as possible to try and get them help. And then all of a sudden you hear the shot. It's an unmistakable sound. You know what it is, and you know what just happened. So calls like that are particularly heavy. Um, I'm gonna trigger a lot of dispatchers with this one as well. That and also other first responders, because those of you that have dealt with it know there is no other sound as heart-shattering, as ear-splitting, as absolutely will make you shiver and go cold to your bones than a mother or a parent that either watched their child pass or just lost their child when they find out that information. It is a sound so guttural that I can't even explain. And it's also worse when you work in a small agency. I say we're a small agency. We're pretty large at this point, but or at least fair size. But when you work in a county or a an agency where you grew up, where you have a lot of family, where you have a lot of friends, the chances of you taking a 911 call from someone you know just ramp up tenfold. Especially, I'm on a volunteer fire department in my local community. I've moved away from where I say away. I didn't move that far, but I've moved to a different community than what I actually grew up in. I was on that fire department for quite a few years as well, but the chances of me running a call on someone that I know is, I mean, more than likely I'm going to run a call on someone I know than someone that I don't know. So it makes it also a lot worse because you know that when you know the person, you know what they normally sound like. You've been around them enough to know that you know when they're upset, you know when they're happy, you know when they're sad. But the sound that comes out of a parent that lost a child is something totally different from a sound they've ever made, and it'll rattle you to your core, and that's the only way I can describe it. And things like that do have a traumatic aspect to it. Of course, the things we deal with are going to be as traumatic as what that person is dealing with in the emergency. Um, for multiple reasons. One, they may have never experienced anything like this before. This is your job. You've experienced it plenty of times, but that stuff also does build. For instance, for me, also being on a volunteer fire department, the chances of that person that may be the only emergency they've dealt with a handful of emergencies in their life. Whereas with you, it's something you deal with just about every day. So things do tend to pile up like that with dispatchers. It tends to weigh on you a little more, especially after further time. And as things roll on, things like that do pile up. So some healthy ways to deal with that, of course, if you're having an extremely hard time, and this goes for anyone outside of the services as well, if you're having a hard time with someone, the best thing to do is reach out. You can talk to your provider. You can talk to the crisis line. I've mentioned the crisis line before. It's not just for people who are thinking about self exit, it's for any type of crisis. And even if they can't help you directly right then and there, they also have it's their job to keep up with these resources and things that you can do. So they're going to have a much better list of resources that you can reach out to, things, different providers who you can reach out to get the help you need on that. Because everybody is also different. Not everybody's coping mechanisms are going to work the same. So we'll just discuss a couple of healthy ways to deal with it and things that I like to do, especially if it's been a heavy shift. Also, it's hard sometimes getting your family members or spouses to understand it. I'm not calling my wife out by any means, but she definitely used to be much of the mindset of like, how can you be stressed out? What's going on? You just answer phones all day. Why are you stressed out? And there really is. There's just so much more to it that people don't realize. and dealing with collaborating with all of these services all at the same time, taking those traumatic calls, taking 10, 15 calls at the same time, literally dealing with emergencies and trying to coordinate responders to those different emergencies. Now, my wife also works in a field where she deals with emergencies and medical care, things like that. And after doing that for a little while, she's definitely changed her mind on things. And some of the things I've, come home and talked to her about and told her about some of the things I deal with, it has definitely changed her mind on things. And so now she definitely understands how it can be a lot sometimes. For me, I, um, you guys know Emily from the podcast. Emily always, tries to convince me to go to treatment places. Um, and I have, I've talked to like doctors and stuff. Texas is not the best at mental health support. Nowadays, there are a lot of options. Once again, not sponsored, but things like BetterHelp online. There are a lot of options like that now that really do help people in areas where mental health is not at the forefront of things. And that's just the case. That's just how it is sometimes, right? Mental health isn't at the forefront of things, but just handling it in a healthy way is the best course of action, whether that is with a provider, therapist, mental health help. For me, I'll usually come home. It'll be hard for me to go to bed, so I'll stay up. I'll take a nice hot shower. I'll lay back on the couch and just relax. I'll do some stretches. My biggest thing, I've always been kind of a nerd, I guess you could say. I've always loved video games, so I'll come home. I'll get onto one of my communities on Discord, or uh, I'll get on to 5M. I'll work on some stuff with the server I'm in. I'll work on vehicle liveries. I'll play some kind of game I haven't played in a while. And to me, that's just a way I can unwind, have some time to myself. So, whatever you love to do, focus on that. You know, be sure you relax. Don't do anything too intense. Don't overdo yourself. Now, like I said, every person is different. Some people, I wish I had this motivation. I wish this was like my addiction. But some people love to work out, and working out or boxing or putting in a lot of that physical activity is something that really helps them and helps them burn off that energy. That's not me. It's not who I am. But for those of you that do have that energy, swing by the gym instead of going home. Maybe take some extra time or do a workout routine outside of your normal workout routine. Just things to help you de-stress, calm down, come back down from where you're at, right? So, some of the other things, of course, relaxation is a big thing that helps a lot of people. Stretches, yoga, things that take away your anxiety personally. And again, not everything works for everyone. Some people do need to turn to medication. I'm definitely one of those that, me personally, in my opinions, I don't think medication solves everything. If I can avoid taking medication, I will. But for some people, it's a real thing sometimes that sometimes people's chemicals aren't quite aligned with where they need to be. And that's where medication comes in to help that. So whether you need anxiety medication, you need some medication for the insomnia that's kind of going along with your stress and your basically your traumatic response. If you're dealing with a lot of insomnia, sometimes you may need a medication for that just to get you back to some normal sleep, because sleep can also help. Um, a lot of people won't be able to sleep just due to nightmares and things. I know that it's a pretty common occurrence. in our field, and it's not always on the nose nightmares, if that makes sense. If you dealt with a particularly bad crash, it doesn't mean that you're going to dream about that crash always. It sometimes means you'll dream about a different crash, or you'll dream about just having the craziest and worst day imaginable as far as everything going wrong. And it's things that will keep you stressed, keep your adrenaline going, and it ends up making you lose sleep. People often think sometimes that the typical movies having the nightmare about the past and sitting up immediately and freaking out is the normal. Movies have made it that way, but that's not always the case. It now does it happen? Yeah, absolutely. Um, Even just holding on to the stress, I know a lot of times, myself and some of my coworkers can swear we hear phones ringing, when we're trying to go to sleep. For me, also on particular stressful shifts, I usually keep my phone on silent now, which most people around me hate, but I do it for a reason. I've gotten home before, went to bed, got a random phone call like an hour later after I went to sleep, and I answer my personal phone, 911, because I'm still in that mode. Like, I'm still stressed out, still trying to come down from that shift and just get some rest and do it all over again. Um, this video may end up being longer than what I intended it to be, but definitely coping mechanisms are going to be a lifesaver if you do choose this career. And, sometimes, especially in smaller agencies, you may not deal with a traumatic call for years on end, right? It it may not be something that you deal with right off. Some people are very unlucky and they deal with it their first day of training. It's the kind of luck of the draw, basically. But at the end of the day, I hope that I've given you guys something to think about, some different ways of coping. Again, the internet is a free resource. Try and figure out some healthy ways of coping. Take up a new hobby, take up a new exercise, do some stretching. Again, if you get to a point to where it is bad enough, the crisis line is not just for self exit and self harm. It is for any type of crisis. So this goes for veterans as well. Of course, there's veterans helplines out there, but anything PTSD related, that is a crisis. If it goes on untreated and goes to a certain point, it is a crisis, which is what the crisis line is for. It's not just self exit or self harm. And again, they'll have plenty of resources. But hopefully, I've said something to help someone out there, help another dispatcher, help some first responders, or at the very least, give you guys some insight as to what it looks like and why sometimes your dispatchers around you can be stressed or in a bad mood or having a tough time with something. They do deal with things that people don't normally think about. I also hope that if you are thinking about this career, this kind of gives you an insight and not necessarily a reality check in a bad way, but a reality check as to what you might deal with. And, I feel like that sometimes is what's missing with some of the training for dispatchers and first responders is the reality that some of these things are not going to be pretty. Some of these things are not going to be great. I do remember when I went through Fire Academy way back in the day, almost, golly, almost 12, 13 years ago now. But the instructors had some public information things that they were able to get a hold of, calls they had dealt with, and they gave us a disclaimer before they did all this and like, hey, we're gonna show you some pretty traumatic images, but this is to help you see that you're gonna come across some really gnarly stuff. and it did help set it in for me. At that point, I'd already been volunteer firefighting for around 2 years when I went through the academy. So I've had ran a couple of support and medical calls that were kind of gnarly. So I was kind of you should never be used to these things, but I was kind of used to it at that point. So I do think sometimes they need to stress that to people. Also, I got a reality check very quickly in my dispatching career. Again, at the point I started dispatching, I had been a volunteer firefighter for around 5 years. Um, no longer than that, 5 or 6. I'd say 6 to 8 years, maybe. And then I had been working on the ambulance for 5 years. Whenever I went over to the police department, so I had definitely seen my fair share of things, but it was an entirely different world. I had ran on a couple of family members with minor injuries and things, but my very first week of training in 911 dispatch, I took a 911 call for my uncle passing there in the city. So, eh, sometimes you can come across things that are wild or not expected. I keep rambling. I'm sorry, guys, but I do hope that this has helped someone. I hope that you'll be back for the next video. Again, I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you do, be sure to like and subscribe. It certainly helps people see what I'm trying to give people an insight as to what 911 looks like, and hopefully giving them information that can help them if they ever do have to call. But again, thank you for stopping by, like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one.